Back. I'm Jim LaPierre. This is Sober Now, and today's topic is changing beliefs and perspectives in recovery. Really looking forward to your input today. We're streaming on Sober Now's Facebook page, Choose Help's Facebook, and a number of different streams around the internet. So if you haven't been to Sober Now's Facebook page, look that up real quick, give it a like. You'll get notifications about all future live streams and other content that we create. Please feel free to message throughout the live stream, and message me if you're watching after the fact. Let me know what your experience is with this or with other topics. Would love to hear about your recovery and what's going on for you today. So we're going to start out talking about perspective. To me, the clear analogy there is peripheral vision. So if this is what I can see when I have a healthy perspective, then this is what addiction, shame, fear does to my perspective. It creates tunnel vision. And unfortunately, the limitations of that are pretty significant. And what we're going to be focusing on today is how beliefs about self drive perspective. We're going to be talking about being more open and receptive, both open-minded and open to new experiences. So we're going to be looking at the process of recovery itself and how it works. But ideally what we're going to focus on is being open to change and being open to acknowledging what's true, what's real, because as we go in recovery, we oftentimes find that what was instilled in us early in life, or the things that we learned through the course of addiction, the things that we learned through traumatic experiences or abuse and neglect, left us with a lot of false beliefs, things that we believe about ourselves that aren't true. They also left us with a propensity for what my friends in recovery call beautiful lies. Lies that we tell ourselves to water down truth that we find painful, to move and avoid things that we find to be unacceptable. So in a lot of respects, recovery is just as much about unlearning as it is about learning. We're looking, of course, to heal old wounds. We're overcoming trauma, and we're acknowledging, recognizing destructive, maladaptive ways in which we cope. So as we grow in recovery, our perspective shifts and expand. We're able to see more, understand more, and there's a lot of challenges that come with that. Acceptance is really the key here. I love the expression, "it is what it is." That can be incredibly liberating because I'm simply acknowledging what I'm powerless over. It can also be a missed opportunity because sometimes what I'm dismissing is something that I do have control over, something that I can improve or change about myself. I always joke that I'm only powerless over nouns, people, places, and things. But I get to choose the changes that I am willing to make in myself, in my life, and in my recovery. So ideally, I remain open, I remain teachable, I remain receptive, and I'm open to new ideas. I'm open to challenges, things that folks call me out on, or opportunities that they see for me. Because of course we all have blind spots. We all have things that we can't see or are unwilling to see. And so allowing people into your recovery, support of others, people who have lived experience, creates just enormous opportunities to expand every part of your life. And all that takes is being open to outside input, listening to your gut, and having a sense of what's possible. Too often we are resistant. Experience is that resistance is always fear. We tend to be defiant, we struggle with authority figures, and we tend to be avoidant. We work really hard to stay in the familiar, to stay with what is familiar to us, and to ultimately what we're doing is maintaining status quo and remaining in our comfort zone. And of course, growth and healing don't occur there. Ideally, we're going to take a step back and examine ourselves. We're going to have an increased awareness of our fear, and a little bit at a time, we're going to bring those things out into the open. We're going to share them with people that support our recovery. because of course 2 minds aren't twice as good as 1, they're a million times as better than 1. And if you're anything like me, then you need to have good people in your life who hold you accountable, who challenge you, and who want to meaningfully support you. I recognize that for a lot of us, what we're really working against is poor self-worth, shame, things that were instilled in us by our family of origin about what our potential is, what our worth is, what's possible in our lives. And sadly, an awful lot of us, because of our experiences in active addiction, our experiences maybe in early recovery in the past, deep down we have this belief that it's only a matter of time until we fail, until we let everybody down. And so this becomes something that our disease uses against us and says, well, then you shouldn't even try. As I was thinking about this, there's a song by the band Stained that came to mind. And the lyric is, "It's been a while since I've gone and fucked things up just like I always do." And that resonates for me. It's painful to consider that. But I think deep down, a lot of us do expect to fail. We do expect to come up short. And I think just being open to the possibility that things can go well, being open to the idea that the past doesn't have to continue to repeat itself. We all seem to have this expectation of deja vu, that things that happened in the past have to keep occurring in the present. And ideally, we're bringing healthier people into our lives today. We're changing, and so our expectations have to change. If you stay with the same people doing the same things, it's reasonable to expect that the past is going to repeat itself because you're staying in the familiar. As you move away from that, as you experience growth and healing, the possibility exists for a better outcome. The possibility of growth and healing increases exponentially. And so our mindset and our expectations have to follow that. Unfortunately, we have a tendency to say and think along the lines of, I'm going to plan for the worst and hope for the best. But I really don't believe it's possible to do both simultaneously. We need to examine how it is that we face fear and stop facing it alone. We need to notice the what-if questions that anxiety produces for us, because we imagine everything that can possibly go wrong. We script write things going wrong. And one of my favorite questions to ask people is, well, what if things go well? What if they turn out far better than you expect? And the importance of considering those questions is when we're having anxiety or fear, the what if questions, if we don't answer them, we just end up catastrophizing. We end up thinking about the worst that can possibly happen. And of course, this doesn't serve us at all. So one of the it's darkly amusing, but one of the most common fears that I hear from folks in recovery is, they're very simple things. So I had an old timer in recovery say to me many years ago, I only have 2 fears, that you'll like me and that you won't. And so it speaks to the discomfort and the expectations that we hold. When it comes to change and transformation and taking on something that's new, we only have 2 fears, that we'll succeed and that we'll fail. So the way that I view that, using the Keep It Simple system, is that I'm going to be afraid either way. And so the choice that's available to me is I can be afraid in a way that is familiar and comfortable and has very predictable outcomes, or I can be afraid in a way that is transformative and potentially improves every part of my life. And again, the most important aspect of that to me is having a willingness to express what my fears are and allowing people in my life to hold me accountable, reassure me, and meaningfully support me. This creates just enormous opportunities. One of my favorite expressions from 12-step programs is the idea that you never have to be alone again. And I think for most of us, when we face fear, we immediately imagine facing it alone, because that's what our experience has been. We learned early on to hide our fears, to hide our true selves, and we learned to withdraw from others when we were struggling. And this is why today we so often fear the idea of being an imposition or a burden to others. The steps are what I point towards as a natural progression of changing those beliefs about self specifically, unlearning unhealthy lessons and unhealthy ways of coping, but most of all, the concept of being able to let go. And what's so extraordinary to me is that the only things I really have to let go of, according to the steps, are things that I truly don't want in the first place. Things like character defects, things like powerlessness over my disease, things like past resentments that I'm still harboring. But of course, the challenge of letting go of these things, despite how much I don't want to hold on to them, is that it's painful to release them. It's uncomfortable. It's vulnerable. It requires a willingness to change them, to forgive them, to let go. And all of these things are incredibly freeing, and yet the process that we have to go through is daunting. And there's a couple of bottom lines here that I very rarely get to hear people talk about, not the least of which is that freedom is scary. To trust ourselves, to have that newfound freedom, to actually believe that the promises that are spelled out in 12-step programs can come true for us, is to allow ourselves a greater level of hope than potentially we've ever had. And hope is uncomfortable for us. Hope feels like an invitation for disappointment. But I love the acronym that my friends in NA use of HOPE. It stands for Hold On, Pain Ends, which I think is one of the most important lessons that we can learn about having hope and about pain itself. Because when you're going through it, it feels like it's never ending. It feels like it's always going to be there. It's terribly uncomfortable to grieve. It's terribly uncomfortable to express what our past experiences have been and to seek to transform those. Very often I'll hear folks say that, the past is the past and there's nothing I can do about it, so I'm going to leave it alone. And I'll challenge them by saying, if your past is still affecting your present, then in a very real way, it's not over. It's not done. It's continuing to have a really powerful impact on your life, and it's continuing to limit you. I'm going to do just a real quick check of the streams. Very much welcome your questions, your comments, your experience, strength, and hope. Would love to hear how things are going for you today. Okay, we're a quiet group so far. That is totally cool. Going to share with you some of the most common false beliefs, especially when they come up in therapy. One of the greatest experts on trauma recovery in the world, Bessel van der Kolk, says very simply that there are three main themes that tend to play out as we're trying to heal past wounds, especially when those wounds are traumatic. So the three false beliefs that we hold, number one, and the thing that I hear most often in therapy for a lot of years now, is the idea that I am not good enough. The second most common is the idea that we are somehow unlovable. And the third is the idea that we are not safe. So the idea of not being good enough really saddens me when I hear that from a person. And I'll immediately ask them, good enough for who? Good enough by what standards? And it's actually something that I'll ask a person, what do you believe about yourself that isn't true? What do you believe about yourself that's really just a feeling and not a fact? And ultimately I'll end up asking, are there any healthy people in your life that agree with this belief that you hold? We have two sets of everything. We have two lenses, two perspectives that we view through, one for only ourselves and one for the rest of the world. We have beliefs that we hold about the world or about people in general. But then by contrast, we oftentimes have very different beliefs about ourselves. And so I want to challenge, where do those ideas come from? Who taught them to you? The people who taught them to you, were they healthy? Were they well-adjusted, loving people? Or were they maybe just really sick and selfish people who taught to you what was taught to them? The idea that a person could be unlovable always saddens me. That's very heavy. And so what this is most often about is that so many of us learned to earn conditional love and acceptance. And the idea that someone could love us unconditionally, without expectation, without demand, is very foreign to us. And so it's very scary to recognize that someone simply cares and doesn't want anything from you. It's very uncomfortable to know that someone accepts you even knowing your faults. These are ideally things that would have been our birthright, things that would have been given to us from the earliest days of our life. But instead, these very simple but very powerful lessons that were instilled within us are what we're working against. And changing those beliefs is extraordinarily uncomfortable because it will change your perspective, it'll change your behavior, it'll change what you expect of yourself, what you allow into your life. And I think it can be as simple as, I often ask people, what makes a person unlovable? And they almost never have an answer to that question. They almost never can conceive of something that would make a person unlovable, and yet, by contrast, they see themselves that way because they were taught to see themselves that way. And so, moving past the idea that our emotions or how we feel about ourselves should dictate our choices or behavior is a huge piece of recovery, especially trauma recovery, that creates an enormous number of possibilities. Thirdly, the idea that I am not safe is an important belief. Unfortunately, sometimes it's a reality. Sometimes objectively, a person is living in a domestic violent or intimate partner violence situation, and they're objectively unsafe. For a person who is in active addiction, by definition, their safety is compromised. There's plenty of things that leave us unstable and insecure. And then there are things that are tied to trauma, tied to mental illness, and it is more the feeling of being unsafe, even though my basic life needs are met, even though my environment is safe. That doesn't mean it feels safe in my own skin, safe in my own mind, and safe in terms of what I expect my present and my future to be like. So safety is the most important of and the most basic of human needs, but it's something that we don't tend to talk about very much. And so learning how to be grounded in the here and now is a huge part of safety. Learning just to connect to our physical environment, using our five senses to be connected. Trauma teaches us disconnection in 1,000 different ways, and one of the most powerful is that we learn to dissociate. We learn to go somewhere else in our minds. We learn to separate ourselves from our physical bodies because what we were enduring and experiencing was simply too overwhelming. So the opposite of dissociation is connection. And so the more fully I am connecting to myself, the more fully I can connect with others and have really healthy, meaningful relationships. To connect to self when there is past pain that's being carried, to connect to self when we are very fearful, seems like it's counterintuitive. It feels like, why would I want to do that? I'm already feeling raw and overwhelmed, and the more I connect to myself, the worse I feel. And so a lot of us are highly avoidant of self. We stay very busy. We're very externally based. We flood our lives with work, with other people's needs, and this is most often an honorable way of avoiding self. So this, of course, inhibits what's possible in recovery. It is oftentimes associated with being an ACOA caregiver and simply being a human doer as opposed to being a human being. So a little bit at a time, I think we learn to feel safe in our own bodies by moving away from self-destruction, by achieving abstinence or harm reduction. We learn to feel safe in our skin by promoting our self-care. We learn to feel safe in our minds by having a healthier perspective, learning more strategies of how to cope with emotion, how to work through the things that scare us, like conflict and confrontation. And then progressively, we develop a greater sense of safety in our homes and then in individual environments, particularly when we allow people to know us and meaningfully support us. All of this is a tall order, and I underscore it because it's not, I don't believe it's possible for anyone to do these things alone. All of us need accountability, reassurance, and support that is best given by people who understand our disease, by people who have a willingness to show up and be present. And I always encourage folks to be very mindful that it helps me to help you. And the more of that we allow into our lives, we get to have more and more stability. Okay. Gonna share with you a story of transformation. A client that I worked with a lot of years ago, we're gonna call him Bob. I met Bob when he was going through rehab, and I was doing some mental health work that was concurrent with what was happening in the rehab. Bob was a young man who's absolutely brilliant, very, very talented creatively, and yet was trapped in a cycle of self-destruction. He had a remarkable talent. He could watch a tradesman, he could watch an artist, and just by watching them, he would learn how it is that they do what they do, and he was able to have a lot of different careers and a lot of different creative undertakings that were very, very successful. But predictably, when I looked at the pattern of Bob's life, sooner or later, no matter how much success he experienced, he would self-sabotage, he would destroy it, he would deliberately put himself in harm's way. And what we were looking at is how unsafe it felt in his own mind. So many of the good people that I've known in recovery intellectualize. A lot of us learned how to hide within ourselves in ways that can be debilitating. And so Bob had many experiences with past recovery, and had the same experience as he did professionally, as he did artistically, which was that he could go about 6 months, really start to experience some success, and then absolutely 100% of the time was going to sabotage himself. And what I challenged him with was the idea was that 6 months was about as far as he could go alone. And after that, everything was too unmanageable, too unsustainable, too overwhelming. And so the idea of self-destruction and self-sabotage is subconsciously we are taking back control in a way that's obviously very unhealthy, that's really unfortunate and sad to watch a person do, but it is self-sabotage is the quickest and most efficient route to feeling like, okay, now I know what to do, now I'm rebuilding, now I'm back in a familiar cycle. So over the course of rehab and some outpatient therapy, the growth in this young man was extraordinary. And this culminated about 6 months in. He came to see me one day, and he was just mad as hell. It was really extraordinary. And so I just checked in with him, and I was like, what's going on with you right now? And he sat back and thought about it for a minute, and when he was satisfied that he had an answer, he said, well, when I first started this part of the journey, I thought what was possible in my life was about this much. And now, as I continue to heal and grow and change, more and more it becomes possible in my life. He said, I don't know why that I'm angry about that. And I suggested it was because it scared the hell out of him. He had a lot of ideas about who and how he was supposed to be. But those were things that were taught to him. Those weren't things that he chose. He had a lot of ideas about what success was, but none of them provided what he most wanted. What he most wanted was to feel loved, to feel safe, to feel like life was worth living. and no amount of professional success, no amount of money, no amount of what he could create outside of himself seemed to alleviate that. And so this is my experience is that a very high percentage of us in active addiction or early recovery are very much slackers. And I have a huge place in my heart for slackers. I was one for about 30 years. And slackers are always people that have gifts and talents and abilities, and they're afraid of their own potential. We reason that if I'm capable of doing great things, then I have a responsibility to do these great things, and I'll probably fuck them up. And so I'll just play small or find some way not to realize my potential. We don't trust ourselves. That's the bottom line. And so as we experience recovery, as we learn about ourselves and connect with others, as my friends in NA say, lost dreams awaken and new possibilities arise. And I love everything about that expression, and my experience is that it is very much true. So my invitations to you today: challenge what it is that you believe about yourself. Write it down on paper, and then consider, are there healthy people that would agree with your assessment? Let other people have input. Let them have their own opinions. An incredible amount of growth happens when we stop projecting how we feel about ourselves and deciding that other people must see us that way and feel about us that way. One of the most beautiful things about recovery is that you're not surrounded by a group of saints, right? You're surrounded by people who have done bad things. That doesn't make us bad people, and more importantly, we don't judge people by their past. We judge them by who it is that they're trying to become today, and what do they choose in their lives today? What are the beliefs and values that are evident in their behavior? So be a work in progress. Consider using the golden rule in reverse. Try judging yourself, talking to yourself, allowing yourself what you would a friend in your situation. Reach out, connect with others, and connect with me. Jim at sobernow.com is the quickest and easiest way to do that. Would love to hear from you. What are you struggling with in your recovery? What questions do you have? And what topics would you like to see covered in future live streams? We're here every week and enjoy connecting with each and all of you. Please, while you're at it, check out our YouTube channel. Sober Now, it has about 160 or so videos there now, completely free. Different topics of recovery from substance use disorder, trauma, mental illness, a lot of useful information there. If you subscribe to the channel, you'll be notified about future live streams and other content that we would load up. And by all means, please check out our site, sobernow.com. Fairly recently, we moved to a subscription service, so we're more affordable than we've ever been. $15 a month gets you exclusive content to all of our home study programs. One for folks in recovery from substance use disorder, and a separate program for folks like me who are affected others, who have a loved one in active addiction or maybe early recovery. How do we cope with that individually? How do we manage that as a family? How do we support each other as we go through one of the hardest things that a family can experience? Thank you to those who wrote in today. I appreciate you sharing the video. I appreciate you expanding this conversation in this audience. Erica, thank you so much for your kind words. Going to be signing off in just a moment, but again, I want to invite you to connect with us. My hope is that you are taking excellent care of you and investing in your recovery, and I will look forward to talking to you next week. Blessed be. Take care.